Today we're talking about chlorine. We're going to talk about what type of chlorine is best, how much to use, and then the three most common mistakes people make when using chlorine so that you don't end up being one of those people. Now, there are two types of chlorine that you can use in your pool: granular chlorine or chlorine tablets. Now, I prefer using granular chlorine because it's easier to use and it's more precise. So with granular chlorine, it's just that it's a powder and you can put it wherever you want. Now, chlorine tablets are also known as trichlor or dichlor. They're these big blocks that look like this, and you can put them in a floater like this, or you can put them in a chlorinator. And the reason why you would want to use this versus this is because if you have an in-ground pool, this could be kind of hard to get in there. You might need a pole to reach all the way to the bottom. It's harder to measure how much you're putting in. But the biggest reason is if you have an above-ground pool, you can actually put the tablet in a floater and float it in the pool so that it slowly dissolves into the water. And some people like that better than having to get in the skimmer and dump it in there. Also, if you leave for the winter, you can put all your chemicals in a chlorinator and a floater and leave it in the pool so that it slowly dissolves over time and keeps your pool open all year long. If you live in a warmer climate, you definitely want to check out the links in the description below to learn more about that. Okay, so let's talk about how much chlorine to use. Now, this is based off of 10,000 gallons of water. I typically recommend shocking your pool once a week to 10 days. Which means you're going to use a lot more chlorine than normal. You're going to use about 12 to 15 pounds of chlorine per 10,000 gallons of water. Now, depending upon how heavy your chlorine usage is, how many people are swimming, if you have a hot tub, any of those things, you might need to add additional chlorine throughout the week. So here are the guidelines for that. You can see here if you have a light bather load, if you're not using your pool very much. Maybe just once or twice a week, then you'll only need to add 0.5 to 1 pound of chlorine per week. However, if you're using your pool every day, you have a heavy bather load, then you're going to use anywhere from 4 to 8 ounces of chlorine per day. If you have a hot tub, you're going to need even more, up to 1 pound per day. Now, obviously, if you're shocking your pool weekly, you're already at that 12 to 15 pounds, so you're well above this. This is just for additional chlorine through the week. If you know that you're using a lot of chlorine, you're adding a lot of chlorine, and you're still seeing your chlorine drop to zero after a couple hours, you may want to consider upgrading your pump to something that has a higher horsepower and can circulate your water faster and more effectively. Check out the video in the description below to learn more about that. All right, so let's talk about the three biggest mistakes people make when using chlorine. Mistake number 1 is using too much chlorine. Now, you can see here, this is our normal level of chlorine. We want to keep it between 1 and 3 parts per million. Here's a quick trick. If you have a hot tub, you want to double that amount. If you have a hot tub, you're going to want your chlorine between 2 and 6 parts per million. Now, if you accidentally add too much chlorine, don't panic. Most of the time, it will dissipate over time. But you can always dilute it by running your pump longer and circulating your water. The worst thing you can do is nothing. You want to continue running your pump and circulating that water. Even if it takes a few days, it'll dissipate over time. And mistake number 2, which is kind of the opposite of that, is not using enough chlorine. You can see here, this is our safe swimming range, 1 to 3 parts per million. But if your chlorine gets too low, you run the risk of getting all these algae and bacteria growing out of control. And if you have algae, it's really difficult to get rid of it. So first off, shock your pool, get that chlorine level up, but then start being more diligent about your chlorine levels. Make sure you're checking them daily and adding additional chlorine as needed. Also, if you have algae, you're going to want to brush the walls and the floor of your pool and vacuum it up and clean your filter. That'll help remove any of that debris that's stuck in there that's preventing your chlorine from doing its job. And mistake number 3 is using chlorine when it's really hot outside. So we had a heat wave last week. It was 105 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona. And what I noticed is my chlorine was dissipating really fast. I was putting in chlorine, it was great for an hour, and then it was gone. And so what happens is when it's really hot outside, especially if you have direct sunlight hitting your pool, that chlorine dissipates really fast. You're going to want to add additional chlorine throughout the day and just be diligent about it. Also, you may want to think about putting in a solar cover. A solar cover does two things. One, it helps keep the heat in your pool at night, but also it protects it from the sun during the day. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions about solar covers, and people think they prevent chlorine from dissolving or being effective. That's not true. You just need to realize that when you put that solar cover on, the sun isn't hitting the pool, therefore that chlorine is going to last longer. So you're going to want to add less chlorine, not more. So we talked about shocking your pool, and that's important. But another important thing to do is balance your pool. Pool balancing is really important because it ensures that your pH level is good, that your chlorine is working properly, and it's protecting you and your swimmers from all these health risks. So watch this video here to learn more about pool balancing.